Well, you know how at a lot of the Broads events, we get people's attention and herd our cats together by using the word Yoo-Hoo. And it's like we count 1, 2, 3, Yoo-Hoo! And it really carries and it gets everybody's attention, but it's kind of an unusual way to get people's attention. So how did that come about? Well, really, it was in the very beginning of my tenure with Broads. I'd only been working for a few months, and MB McAfee was the executive director at that time. And we had gotten an invitation to come join a protest out in Utah, Dead Horse Point State Park area, where oil and gas exploration was happening, and they were doing seismic testing and driving these huge vibrosis trucks that would go on a grid across the landscape, and periodically they would drop this platform and vibrate the earth, and there were seismic measuring devices, and it was like, okay, we'll go protest this. But I had just had knee surgery. I was wearing a knee brace. Couldn't really walk far, much less cross country. And MB had really bad back problems. So here are these two old, kind of disabled Broads at that point, going out to join the protest. Well, we got a late start. We had a really long drive past Moab, so 3+ hour drive ahead of us. And we finally get out to where the protesters were meeting and discover that there's nobody there. Okay, what are we gonna do? Where are the protesters? You know, we've been told they were hiking out to find these big vibrosis trucks. Well, okay, we're not gonna go hike cross country for miles in the desert in the condition we were in, but we found the staging area where all the big heavy equipment and trailers and stuff were for the company that was doing this exploration. And we parked our car and walked over to the gate that, you know, no trespassing, stay out, private property. And we're looking in, and there's one of these big vehicles right there in this staging area. And MB's like, well, we don't have to go hike to see what these are like. There's one right there, you know, we could go in. And I'm like, well, there's a no trespassing sign. And she's like, well, I wonder if anybody's around. And just about then, somebody stepped out of a trailer on the far side of the yard. And MB just goes, Yoo-Hoo! Yoo-Hoo! And I'm like, oh my God, I cannot believe she's like Yoo-Hooing these guys over. But it worked. So we got his attention, and he comes over, and MB asks, you know, can we come in? And this is who we are, and, you know, we'd like to understand what you're doing out here. And his answer was, no, you can't come in and look at this vehicle. But he went and got the owner of the company. And the owner came, and we ended up going into their yard, the staging area, and having a conversation. And the conversation lasted for probably an hour. And during that time, MB started to get fatigued, and we kind of were moving towards this great big vehicle that has tires that are, you know, way taller than I am, and I'm almost 6 feet tall. And she finally says, you know, is it okay if I sit down, you know, in the bottom well of the tire? And he's like, oh yeah, sure. And she's sitting there and looking so small and so broad. And I finally said, you know, can I take a picture of her sitting there in the tire? And, you know, before we were done, took pictures of the whole machine and the equipment. And then the guy says, well, we had a great conversation. I want to say that first. We talked about our views of what was going on our public lands and the impacts of oil and gas development and wilderness and what that meant for the future. And the owner actually had his son, who I forget how old, you know, like 8 to 10 years old. And so when we talked about future generations and what we wanted for our children and our grandchildren, you know, he could relate to some of that. We didn't agree. We respectfully disagreed on certain things, but we agreed on a lot of things, and we had communication, effective communication. And so at some point he said, well, you said you came out here to see these trucks in action. Do you want to go see where they are? And we're like, well, yeah, but we really can't walk very far, and we don't know where they are. And he's like, well, we know exactly where they are. We can drive you there. And we're like, Okay. So we go to get in their great big Ford Excursion, the biggest thing, you know, of the big SUVs. And just as we're about to get in, MB goes, oh, wait a minute, I forgot something. And I'm thinking, what is she doing? Well, we had brought, for demonstration purposes, a little portable solar panel and a little, like one of those little yard windmills to demonstrate alternative non-fossil fuel energy. And MB goes to the car and gets these things and brings them and puts them in the oil and gas company's vehicle with us so we can go out and find, and I was just like, oh my God, MB, I can't believe this. Well, they drive us exactly to where the trucks are about to intersect with the main paved road. And we get out and we walk over and we take photos of that. And then about 15 minutes later, here come the other protesters, and they have been following these vehicles for hours. They're hot, they're sweaty, they've got their signs and stuff, and they see us there talking, and they come up and try to engage with the oil and gas company management, and the guys wouldn't have anything to do with them, nothing. But they continued to stand there and have conversation with us and give us their business card and let us take pictures with our windmill and our solar panel in front of the Vibrosis trucks. And it was just like, okay, a real learning lesson of maybe how to have effective communication with people that sometimes we can portray as the bad guys or the opposition. And instead of just polarizing and going at each other, the YooHoo really opened up the opportunity to be exactly what broads mostly are, is, you know, older women of a certain age who can be respectful and fierce and yet polite and listen and try to understand all of the viewpoints. Doesn't mean we're backing down from our position on wilderness and wildlands, but they heard our side of the conversation. So that's kind of how the YooHoo started. And then we found it was a very effective way of capturing people's attention in camp, at broad walks, wherever we had a herd of chatty women who needed to be quiet and pay attention or get over here because we're about to do something important. So there's a YooHoo story.